is sponsored by nobody. Just follow my Instagram, it's kinda lit. Recently, I bought myself a Mamiya RB67, and what better way to test it than with a film I'm completely unfamiliar with, Filmography Redscale. One of my favorite movies of all time is Blade Runner 2049, and in that movie there's a very iconic scene where Joe is walking through the old city and it's completely red, and I wanted to see if there's a way to kind of replicate that, and what better way to get a completely red cityscape than with a Redscale film. But first, let's do some early morning shoots. Now, I wrote all the metadata down, so like the ISO, f-stop, and shutter speed for all of these photographs. So they are all shot at ISO 200. I wanted a much more red look, and I heard that if it is less exposed, then it ends up turning out more red. So this first shot is ISO 200, f8 at half a second. It's very much of an orange yellow, so this was much longer in terms of exposure. More light was let through. You can really see the contrast between the shadows where it's much more orange versus the sky, which is a lot more yellow because it's more bright. The second shot, similar story. I shot it at f5.6 at a quarter of a second. Something that's also really interesting to notice is that the more exposed it is, the more natural light kind of comes through, or natural color. So even though this is a Redscale film, you can still see that the color differences in the house and the trees. This photo, I think I captured the Redscale orange look that I was looking for. It was at f3.8 at 1/15th of a second. You can just kind of see how it's much more orange. The sky isn't as bright as the previous two images. Even the bright white Miata, it has more color to it. Now this fourth photo was shot at f3.8 at 1/60th of a second, so much faster, and you can really see how red it is compared to the previous three images. My scanner actually struggled to capture all the detail in the shadows, so there's some scan lines. I'm sure if I did some more noise reduction and whatnot, it would come out much cleaner, but just for the sake of the video and just to kind of get a general idea of how these photos look and the way Redscale performs in different lighting conditions and different exposure times, I think it works. This fifth photo was shot at f11 at 1/15th of a second. I think if I got more of a red color, exposed less, I would like it more. There's still some detail in the shadows. It's obviously quite noisy, but it's still there. I'd say I ended up metering for the highlights much more than the shadows. There's also a little bird on top of that cross. It's kind of lit. There's a real bird. Now these next two photos, it just kind of again shows the comparison between exposures. I think this one's at f11 and the next one is at f8 at 1/15th of a second, for both of them. You can kind of see how less exposure means it's going to be much more red compared to the second photo, which is much brighter. The sky is much more blown out and it's much more yellow. Now this is probably my favorite shot out of the entire roll. Maybe that church one is pretty decent, but this one I think is just visually more interesting. It was shot at f5.6 at 1/60th of a second. It was in the shadows, so there isn't as much light on it. If you get the exposure correct, you can kind of see a much more yellow cast over the image, but the colors don't come through as much. I mean, the grass is very green. The car was also green, but you don't really notice that because it was a much more muted green. If it was exposed for longer, it may have shown more color. Now, at this point, I had two shots left. So I decided to use them out downtown. So I went to the top of some parking garages just to kind of get a more aerial view of the city, try to capture as much as I could. This first shot, it's of this kind of plaza area. I don't think this really worked too well. I think it would have been better if I shot from the ground. There was just still so many people. It's just not that interesting. There's cars all in the shots, but it just looks like it's a daylight balanced film shot during night. This last shot I think works a lot better. It actually looks like it's a Redscale photo. There's this dark alley, it's kind of ominous. Again, I think it would have been just more interesting if I was actually down in the alley shooting it. In conclusion, I think I'll definitely experiment with Redscale film more. I don't know if it really fits my style, but it's just an interesting style of photography that I think would be good to explore. My RB67 now, it works perfectly fine. There's no real mechanical issues with it. There's a few scuffs here and there, but it works. And now I know how to do long exposure shots. It's a really weird process where you have to put it onto T, and you have to use a shutter release cable to open up the shutter. Then you have to either advance it or you have to change the shutter speed. And in order for the shutter to close. Strange process, but hey, now I know how to do it and I can do long exposure shots. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, consider subscribing. I'll try to get a video up every month. Happy holidays, and I hope to see you in the next one.